Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
associated with the creation
or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked
and sometimes what didn't.
You will also hear very personal experiences
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
and inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. My guest today is David Young, founder at Federated Computer. He has been a pioneer in cloud computing even before the term was invented. In fact, he and his team helped invent the term. In this conversation, we could recall many of the developments of a couple of decades ago, as well as what keeps him engaged now at Federated Computer. David touches upon his early career journey and the transition to Silicon Valley and the startup space, the contrast between working in a corporate environment and startup life. I asked him about how he finds problems to solve, and he shares very interesting tips on that. Talks about the importance of customer empathy and team dynamics, and the challenges that come with open source adoption. Then we get into talking about AI, open source, and the future potential. He shares career tips for IT and open source enthusiasts. And I finally asked him what keeps him grounded, and David shares some of the practices and tips to stay grounded. Listen on. Hi, David. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
It's great to be here, Shiv. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I was absolutely excited when your name was proposed and said that one of the people who have been around, done a lot of innovative things, and seen the industry grow. So I think I will have a lot of questions, but before I get ahead of myself, we'll probably start with your origin story and how you got into IT and what has been your career trajectory.
Yeah, you're right. We probably both have seen quite a bit of stuff, looking at our gray hair. And you look very good in gray. So my mother was gray from her early 30s, and so was I. But, sometimes that's because of our involvement in the IT industry itself. I never wanted to be in technology or in IT to begin with. My college education was actually in something very obscure. I did a bachelor's degree and some master's work in ancient Greek and Latin. So I was a classicist. I loved classics. I loved reading the ancient authors. But as I was finishing up some of those studies, I was recruited to come to a New York bank and come and work for them. Back in those days, and we're talking about the early 90s, they still looked to liberal arts students as a way to sort of get diversity among their sort of perspectives in the bank. And so I went to work for this bank, and there are, a lot of Wall Street banks at the time, I think it's still true, were very aggressive about their adoption of technology. So when I was in Wall Street, we did a lot of work to take technology, apply it to the vast data sets that we had to analyze, and what is now called a data lake. We were building those. Of course, we didn't have the vast amounts of RAM and disk and all the rest, so we had to be very creative in the ways that we took all this data in and processed it. And in some ways, it forced us to be more rigorous in our approach from a programming and technology standpoint. But that really showed me the possibilities that technology could bring to sort of everyday problems, whether it's in finance or other sorts of industries, and I became hooked at that time. Yeah, I then left the bank, and I moved out to California, to Silicon Valley. I was fortunate to be part of a startup there as the CTO, and have done a number of startups since then. And those startups have, one of the ones that I'm most proud of is a company called Joyent, which was really the first cloud computing company. We were the first to offer virtual machines and containers over the internet. At Joyent, we invented a piece of technology called Node.js, which is widely used on the internet today. We had things that were sort of precursors to, packaging up HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as applications. We called that Slingshot. We had our own cloud operating system. We had a really great team that did some very, very innovative things. And, that's really what I love about technology, is working with small teams, sort of getting in there, trying to figure out how do we creatively bring a solution to the problem. And then, of course, in a startup, you're also looking to figure out how do you actually get customers to pay for the solution that you've built. So that's all a very exciting thing to do. And, I've been involved in that, now for a couple decades.
Yeah. So how is this transition from corporate life to a startup life?
Well, it's kind of crazy. It's very different. I mean, in a corporate life, my experience in the bank was, we would do all-nighters, we would do these sorts of things, but we never sort of worried about the possibility that, things might just cease to exist as a business. We did our work. We were more focused on, I would say, the internal politics of, how do I go from being this and that to an assistant vice president to a vice president, sort of work our way up the ladder and impress our bosses. So, really the customer we had outside customers, but a corporate sort of environment encourages us to be more focused on the internal customer. Whereas in a startup, you have no assistance whatsoever. And I think it's, you can sort of sit there with your partner, and I've done this a couple times where you have an idea. Typically for me, it's something that I want in my own life. It's like, I wish this existed. When I started Joyent, I was sitting there, I was like, I wanted to start a company, but I had to, in order to start the company, I had to go rack and stack a bunch of servers in a data center. I had to go buy a really expensive Oracle database. I had to do all these things. I had to get a database manager, someone to run the database for me. It was just so complicated, so expensive that I began to wonder, like, would it be possible to use tools, open source tools to sort of build this? And then, I was like, I really wish I had that sort of product. And then that's what we built. We built the cloud. And, as I said, we were the first to deliver virtual machines and containers. But it was something that I and my co-founder needed for ourselves, for our own product. And, that's always a very exciting thing to do because you're very motivated. You're very sort of invested in the idea. I've never quite understood, the folks that get motivated with startups, based on, say, monetary remuneration, some sort of, well, if we do this, we're going to make a lot of money. And that typically, in my experience, just doesn't work out. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but startups are so difficult. You have, you're on your own. You're really having to fight through a lot of different problems, not just the technology problems, but running a business, finding customers, getting all that together. That, it requires a lot of sort of dedication to the problem itself that you're trying to start. And if you don't have that, at least for me, I just don't have what it takes. I'll tell you a funny story. After Joyent, Joyent was a big success. We sold it to Samsung. I did make some money. And I sort of had this attitude that, wow, I'm sort of a little G God. I can do whatever I want. So what I wanted to do was I started an ice cream company called Honeymoon Ice Cream.
Wow.
And you this is completely orthogonal to technology companies, but I had, it turns out, no real interest in building an ice cream company. Once you come up with the flavors, I mean, food is incredibly difficult. It's a whole different ball of wax. And I quickly lost interest. And so the company suffered consequently. It was, we had good product. We had great reviews from the top culinary magazines in the United States. And we ended up being able to grind our way to like 2,000 grocery stores carrying the product. But it ultimately was not a success because there wasn't that sort of passion around the product and sort of the solution that we are offering to customers. And when I get involved in, such a solution where I'm delivering something that I think, wow, this is really going to change the way people think about, solving these problems for themselves, because I think it's solving the problem for me. That's something that really sort of demands my total attention, and I'm thinking about it all the time.
So, you kind of partly answered a question that I wanted to ask you about. How do you find problems to solve? At least in the case of Join, you mentioned that was a pain that you experienced. But for the ice cream company, what was the trigger?
Well, I mean, to be completely honest about it, I was like a lemon. I had been squeezed out. I mean, Joint had taken so much effort, and I was really exhausted and sort of burnt out. So I wanted something different. And, who doesn't like ice cream? But my point there is that the ice cream company it wasn't something I could sort of, at the end of the day, take it or leave it as far as a problem that I really wanted to solve. Now I'm working on another company, Federated Computer, and we're solving the problem of the cost of software for businesses. And again, we're going back to the open source closet, so to speak, and using all these tremendous open source products, integrating them together and saving people a lot of money, helping them to adopt open source. And so I would say, generally speaking, for me, the things that have been attractive are things like platforms where I can build something, bring other people into the mix, work together with them, and sort of collaboratively we build this thing that's going to change the way people think about a given problem. And that really gets me excited. It's not to say, Shiv, that from day to day there aren't setbacks. You have sort of parts where, wow, this is really hard, or there's conflicts on the team, or these sorts of things. But for me, finding the problem that I want in my own life, that's where I get excited. And again, after the ice cream company, I started looking around, like what was required to sort of get the software I needed to run a business, and it was so expensive. It was so siloed. I thought there's got to be a better way. What would that solution look like for me? And so that led to Federated Computer, and now I'm working with a great team, very excited, and that's sort of how it's worked for me.
Okay. Yeah, before we get to Federated, I do have some questions there. How was it to give up something that you built with passion, particularly Joined?
Oh, you mean the process of selling it?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I imagine, I have a couple children. It's a little bit like children, where you love your children. You're very excited to see them grow and mature and learn responsibility and all these sorts of things. But for goodness sakes, there is a certain happiness when they turn 18 or 21 and they go off and they start their own lives, right? So I think that's a natural progression that also happens in a startup business where you sort of have to recognize when you've done everything that you wanted to do, and maybe you don't have the talent or the capabilities to go, say, to the next step or the next level. And so, finding, another company or someone else to take that over is something that is reasonable and is, in fact, it's been part of my own maturation process where I have sort of had to realize the parts of the company history where I'm really, really effective, early stage, product definition, sort of building those initial products, the MVP, getting to market, finding those initial customers, getting it to a certain point. But once a company gets to, I would say, above 50 to 60 people for me, then it takes on it begins to sort of feel a little bit like a larger company, and a company where now you can't know everyone in the company. You can't sort of know their personalities. You can't, they're just sort of, they're a position. They're, assistant this of that. And so that becomes a more difficult thing for me and less fun. Now, there are other people in the world I've discovered that's where they get very, very excited. And they're like, well, wow, I don't have to go through all the craziness of sort of bringing something from zero to whatever. Now I can take it from here and I can grow it from wherever it is at that time to this big, new, massive thing. And I recognize that those people exist. I'm not one of those people. And so I would say, letting go of a startup is a little bit like that, beginning to understand sort of that there are differences among people and the talents that we have and the things that we can bring to a company.
Yeah, that's interesting because both in joint as well as federated, assume that you would have clients who are of different sizes, right? Small
Yes.
companies, entrepreneurs, as well as large enterprises.
Right.
How do you create that empathy in your team, which is probably more used to working in this 50% kind of teams where you said everybody knows everybody else and there's a camaraderie and all that, to understand what probably a high touch relationship needs?
Well, there's two parts to my answer, which is, first of all, I've learned over time that I kind of like to work with the same people over and over, because then we sort of know what our strengths and weaknesses are. So when it comes to customer interactions, we sort of know, oh, well, so and so is really good at that, and we've sort of figured out the missing pieces. That's what a team is. I think of software development as something very akin to, say, a band or a movie crew where you have different talents there. You don't want to have a bunch of David Youngs because that's going to skew things in one direction. You want to have people that can do this piece, that have empathy for customers, that are those sorts of things, and have that good mix. And oftentimes when it's a purely engineering team, you miss out on that customer empathy because you're sort of focused on, well, my product, it solves the problem, but and this leads to my second part of the answer, which is it's really important, and I've had to learn this. This is not something that just sort of comes to me naturally, but I've had to learn to be a really good listener and start to sort of listen to my colleagues, listen to the customer, and sort of put myself into their shoes more often than I might care to. But if I can do that, it becomes kind of a superpower, because then I can really focus on, well, how is the customer perceiving the solution I'm putting in front of him or her? How are they sort of understanding, what we're offering, and then where do we need to improve? And is this fair to the customer? Is this something that's going to drive their adoption, or not so much? And honestly, the first set of customers is my coworkers as we build the product. I have to sort of be empathetic towards them and their sort of response to the product. And I have to be personally careful that I don't sort of bully them into acceptance, where I'm the boss and, I'm the founder, I'm the boss, so listen to what I'm saying. I've got the vision. Yeah, I have vision. I have an idea, but, I have found that it's very, very important to get sort of a rigorous feedback loop going between you and your colleagues, me and my colleagues, and me and the customers with my colleagues. And that sort of ends up being, sort of leading to the best outcome. Now, there's a trap here because you can't just listen to what the customer says, because if you're actually innovating and doing something that is unexpected that they haven't seen, or maybe they're not going to know, they don't have the time with the idea that you have as an entrepreneur. And so you have to sort of put on your listening ears in that context that, well, this may be something new to them and they may outright reject it. I remember early on at Joyent, we went and, we thought we had a great product. We were saving people a lot of money in the cloud, a lot of headache, a lot of flexibility that they got from adopting our solution. And we went to a large credit card processing company, and we were told, we got a lot of rejection. We were told, we will never use the cloud. We will never use the cloud. It was a very common refrain. And that can be very disheartening for an entrepreneur, because you have confidence, you and your team, you have confidence that you have a product that's actually going to be very, very beneficial to the customer. The price is right, the capabilities are right, and all the things, but they're rejecting you. And so you have to sort of take that rejection, and you have to be able to sit with it and sort of figure out, well, why are they rejecting? And, my instinct, and I think a lot of people's, well, they're just stupid, or they're not as smart as me, or they don't, and that's a trap that you have to sort of avoid. But on the other hand, you also have to avoid the trap of sort of taking the customer at his or her word. You have to sort of get in there and figure out, well, why are they rejecting? What are we not maybe communicating that they need to hear? What is maybe missing that would be actually very valuable to both us and the customer? These are things that are important. Now, in my experience, Shiv, these are not things that you sort of learn from reading a book or watching a podcast. These are things you learn. Yes, you can become aware of them. But these are things you learn through a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes made, and sort of get back up, dust yourself off, and keep on going.
Yeah, in fact, those are the kind of stories that act as triggers. Many of our listeners keep saying that, wow, either I never thought about it, or, okay, now I need to do something to actually experience it myself. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone should be, sorry to interrupt you, but everyone should do startups. I just think startups are, in our industry, it's so much fun. I recognize, what I said earlier, not everyone has the personality, but, the rewards are really tremendous. Even when you fail, the rewards are really tremendous, because if you have sort of a listening heart, someone that's going to listen, and, maybe that's another colleague of yours that can speak to you in a way that you'll be able to listen to him or her, even when you're sort of feeling hurt or rejected. This can be a sort of tremendous path of self-discovery and self-improvement.
Yeah. Talking of rejections, one of the things that I've heard from many enterprises is that they cannot bet their business on open source. They would rather have someone who's there to support them, to grow with them.
Right.
So how have you been able to handle those objections or concerns?
Well, that's in fact what we do at Federated, is we provide the support. We provide the support so that a company a Federated Computer customer that's using open source or a joint customer that was using the joint cloud is getting the support that they need to run and make sure that that experience with the open source software is successful. In fact, you're going to get a better experience, in my opinion, from open source with the support that you're talking about than a closed source solution. We have no idea, and you're just completely beholden to the, say Microsoft, for example. That's the one that comes to mind, where you're just completely beholden to Microsoft to solve your problem. The beauty of open source, and we all use open source products every day. If you're using an Apple product, you're using open source. If you're using an Android phone, you're using open source. If you're using the internet, you're using open source. Many of our cars now run on open source. Now, I'm not saying there isn't some proprietary software in there, but it's been packaged. It's been, as you say, we want this to be sort of packaged and presented to us in a way that we don't have to do all the heavy lifting. And in some ways, I sort of make an analogy to food. We go to restaurants. I could go and get the noodles and the meat and the this and that and make the curry and whatever. I could do that myself, but all the ingredients are so-called open source. There's nothing, but getting someone to sort of prepare the meals, get me the meal and all that. That's a value. That's a sort of a nice value, and I think the same is true for open source. The wonderful thing about the open source community is it's so broad and it's so deep that we're really all sort of working to sort of build great solutions for customers together. And then we all go off and we mix and match these things to produce our own products. And that's just an amazingly positive way to do software versus secret and proprietary. And, that's my opinion. But I think the industry is sort of moving in that direction.
Yeah. So the corollary question or the need that comes up is now with pretty much every company being a software company, or at least relying on software to do their business, and the number of new tools or technologies that come up at such a rapid pace, how would they be able to integrate? Would it make them more dependent on a systems integrator or a consultant?
Well, I think you raise a really interesting point there, because I agree with you that companies, not every company, but most companies today are software companies. They rely on software to optimize their workflows, to define their products, to deliver products to market in ways that were never possible before. I think what's missing is the next step, which is and this is where the Wall Street banks really got onto the principle I'm about to introduce very early and have been very successful, is you have to use your software as a business advantage. You have to think of your software as an advantage. And so therefore, if you see your software in your business as being a business advantage, you're not going to wait for Microsoft or SAS or SAP or one of these big proprietary companies to say, "Hey, Mr. Business, we've now decided to give you some more advantage." That's just insane. You're going to want to take those tools and figure out ways to use those tools to your advantage so that you can differentiate yourself from your competition. And as you might imagine, in my opinion, open source really opens up the possibility of this. Now, whether it's done through an in-house team that's doing the sort of business advantage development for you, or a partner, there are two ways to sort of think about that. But you have to think of your software as a business advantage, as a business differentiator, and that means that you're going to be in the business of thinking about software development at some point in your business. That's my opinion.
So how do your clients discover you?
Oh, well, that's a great question. we're a startup company, and so we do a lot of advertising on podcasts. Podcasts are just an amazing medium for discovering all sorts of new ideas, new people. So we use podcasts, we use paid advertising. We're very rigorous about, sort of measuring the cost versus the sort of cost of acquisition of a customer and trying to sort of figure out what that's doing. We also get out there through, providing value in the open source community, whether it's through documentation, becoming sort of the experts. You have to be sort of very focused on the return and making sure that, whatever way that you're getting out there to customers, you're actually seeing a return, tracking, your investment, whether it's time or money, and then sort of investing more in the things that are working and, being willing to get rid of the things that aren't working.
Switching back to the open source concept or the movement and what's happening today in the AI world. Some of these models which are open source, including the DeepSeek and other newer ones, plus there are, of course, these closed ones. And in general, the impact of AI, how do you see that impacting the need for software or all this agentic AI everybody talks about going to the open source way or having to create something which is custom for each organization?
Yeah, so just a quick little history. I mean, this is something that our industry has been hopeful for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
We've been sort of working on this problem of intelligent agents, of what used to be called machine learning. There've been a number of sort of monikers for what we're now talking about as AI for a long time. I remember when I was at the bank, we were one of the first to provide an app on the Apple Newton, which is a platform that no longer exists. It was a fantastic, but it had this amazing handwriting. And, the idea was that we could give this to bond analysts. They could go out and we would be able to capture a lot of, and so we had some problem there. But there was another very interesting platform at the time that we were also working with called Magic Cap. And I don't know if you remember Magic Cap, but they had this infrastructure that they had built where I was supposed to be able to talk to my Magic Cap device, and it would go and buy flowers for my wife and get the flowers sent to my wife and all these sorts of things.
Oh.
Now, by the way, we're talking like the late 80s, early 90s. So the internet wasn't quite on the scene yet. So these ideas have been around for a long, long time. The problem is getting them so that the results from these models, whether they're today's Olama models, and I'm so happy that that AI is becoming more open source, that more people can work on them, more people can innovate, more people can sort of figure out ways to open this up, and I think that will go a long, long way towards dealing with any of the safety concerns that people have. But you have to sort of get something where it is right 99% plus of the time. And if it's not right 99% plus of the time, almost 100% of the time, people just won't find it that useful. And so I think where we are today, and I'm not an expert, but I think, we look at this at Federated Computer as, sort of how can we use these tools in very pinpointed ways to help sort of extend the intelligence of our customers. And that we've found very successful. Today, when we sort of step back and say, well, use an AI tool to sort of run things for a customer, that oftentimes is not as successful because the customer is having to do a lot of editing of the output of the model in order to get it to where it wants, so much so that it's not that useful. So I guess that's all to say. I'm very hopeful. I've been involved for a long, long time in trying to bring this to fruition. And at Federated Computer, we actually have some work that we're doing for our customers in this area. Again, it's mostly based on the open source models, because that's really our business model, is to take open source, integrate it together, make it very useful and easy for our customers to adopt these open source tools. And we're hopeful for the future.
A little segue, but still sticking to the open source level. If somebody is considering a career in IT,
Yeah.
and they would like to work on open source or get probably more benefit by adopting open source approaches, what tips would you have for those people?
It's just sort of the standard stuff, Shiv, because it comes down to hard work. I mean, it really comes down to hard work and motivation. And if you have hard work and if you have motivation and you're willing to put in the hours, you can really achieve some pretty magical stuff. I saw this at Joyent. We were the first one to offer Ruby on Rails hosting. So we were very sort of saw the whole Ruby on Rails thing take off. And, most of those guys, I'm going from memory here, but very few of them had computer science degrees. They were self-taught. It was almost like guitarists, this sort of self-taught guitarists. They were the Jimmy Pages of the computing world at the time. No, they weren't building chips and things like that. And that requires a lot more technical education in order to do, electrical engineering, these sorts of things to be successful. But in software, it's really just a question of motivation and hard work. And for me, in sort of mentoring and working with people that I've worked with in my own companies, what I've seen successful is find a problem that you really care about. I don't care what it is. I mean, if you're into ham radio, or if you're into chess, or if you're into something, write a program, and do something that you actually care about. And that's going to go a long, long ways towards teaching you everything you need to know technically to be successful in the industry. And then you just need all the other things like, the ability to work well with others and all the rest of it. But from a technical standpoint, it's never been easier, because most of the sort of core technologies that you're going to be asked to use, whether it's in a corporate environment or in a startup environment or a big software company, they're all available out there to use. The sort of barrier, the gap between me as a starter, and being someone that's able to be hired and be successful in the company is just my motivation and my hard work.
Okay. What about people who are probably going through this mid-career kind of crisis, who probably can leverage their experience and contribute to open source?
Yeah, and there's so many ways to contribute to open source that aren't engineering. I'm reminded of this all the time. In open source, let's take a project that's part of Federated Computer called Nextcloud, which is a great replacement for Google Workplace. You get calendar, you get contacts, you get group chat, you get a full Office suite, all these sorts of things. It's really a fantastic product. The core team is out of Germany, but they take contributions both on the software side, but frankly, the thing that they most need the help with is documentation. So often that's a very good way for people mid-career who may not have the software background but are very clear thinkers, are great writers, to get in there and start to contribute, as far as documentation or introduction of these projects, and sort of promoting these projects. And those projects are really, really grateful for those contributions. Those are also open source contributions. And, the internet really highlights this because you're able to sort of Google search or whatever your brand of search that you like, and find the solution because of the people that do the documentation. So I think mid-career folks can consider that as one area that can be helpful. The other thing is you can have an amazing software project. I won't name any names, but there are a few that come to mind that are really, really amazing, really have tremendous capabilities, but they even have good documentation, but they have no one helping them with go-to-market. So this is sort of translating this to the people that should be paying, either the integrators or other people, and sort of figuring out, how do I sort of bring this product to market? Now, that may not be contributing to open source per se, but there may be, like I said, I don't want to name names, but it's a way to, and if anyone's interested, I'm happy to sort of direct them to these projects. Just send me an email to david@federated.computer. But projects need people with sort of mid-career experience that can help them go to market, and whether this was with marketing or sales or businesses that are going to be formed around these projects to sort of help them monetize. This is a tremendous need in the open source community.
Yeah, it's the first time I heard these types of contributions. Yes, some people have mentioned documentation, but didn't realize that there are projects that need support taking them out to the market.
And that's a great way to start a business is, that's frankly what Federated Computer is, which is our focus. We do have engineers. We do a lot of engineering, but our principal focus is taking these projects, bringing them together into a unified whole, into a rational whole that a customer can understand and adopt. And that's a go-to-market motion that many of these projects, I would say, don't necessarily understand in a holistic way.
There's also this general impression that many of the software folks are geeks.
Yeah.
It means that they're all lost in their work and they don't probably have any other interests.
Right.
What have been some of your personal practices to stay grounded?
Yeah, well, I think that we have that sort of impression of people in software because, frankly, it's somewhat true. It really does require hard work and focus and exclusivity in order to be, because being a software engineer in particular is a lot like being a writer, a creative writer, which is, and some of the discipline is the same. I mean, one of my favorite writers is a woman from Georgia, the south of the United States. Her name is Flannery O'Connor. And if you read about her sort of practice of writing, it will remind you of what we sort of hear about as being a good practice for software engineering. That is to say, she got up, she would eat her breakfast, and then she would go into her office, and she would be focused. She would be hyper-focused for 4 or 5 hours. And she didn't do anything. Even if she had to sit in front of her typewriter doing nothing, that's what she did. And so there is a certain amount of that exclusivity that can be off-putting, but it's what's required. And, it's one of the things. But your question is, how do I remain grounded? Well, personally, I have, sort of a spiritual practice I like to sort of maintain, which it doesn't really help me from a software standpoint per se, but it definitely helps me to be a better human being, have less sort of recognize when, and you have this in startups where you're all yelling at each other and screaming and yelling and vicious fights, to go back and say, hey, so-and-so, I was really out of bounds there. I shouldn't have, and that's something I've had to learn. And sort of that self-awareness comes from the spiritual practice that I have, where I do sort of hold to that. And then I think the other thing is, and this is something I've also learned, is you really do have to have those boundaries. So I mentioned Flannery O'Connor's practice of 4 or 5 hours with the typewriter. Okay, at a startup, you may be doing 10 or 12-hour days. Don't do it every day. And that's something I've had to learn, which is, take time. I live in Colorado. Take time at least once a week, one day a week. Do not have your phone. Don't have your computer. Go ski. Go walk in the woods. Get outside. Get some sun. Hopefully you're getting some sun every day. But, you have to, it is what it is sometimes. But, have sort of respect for yourself so that you can de-stress. And then, in a team, in a startup team, it's good to be sort of on the lookout for my colleagues as well, because I want my colleagues to be safe and secure as well and have this sort of opportunity to take time off. So that's something that we've actually been having conversations at Federated Computer about, which is, hey, we need to take some vacations, believe it or not. We've been going at this for a couple of years, and I would say in 2024, we had a few sort of, and there's nothing wrong with having really vigorous, even loud disagreements about issues. That's part of the transparency and the honesty and the sort of engagement that we have with each other. But we started to sort of have conversations with each other and say, I may be getting a little bit wiped out here, and so I need to go take a vacation. And in fact, my turn's going to be next week. I'm taking a vacation. I'm going to unplug as much as possible. I think that's part of staying grounded.
That's very nice. Yeah. Was there something that we did not touch that you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, it's been really wonderful. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to be in our industry, and it's a little bit like being a magician, especially for people that don't understand what we do. And it's such a privilege to be able to do the things that we do and bring the solutions that we can bring to folks and improve their lives, make things a little bit better, hopefully make a little bit of money in the process. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to sort of recount all those benefits. And I leave this chat with you, Shiv, a little bit more grateful for the opportunities that have been given me.
Thanks a lot, David, for all the wonderful the stories as well as the experience and the whole perspective of staying grounded, being balanced, being a good listener. There are a few things that I get to take back as well. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Shiv. Bye-bye.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.